So thanks everybody for coming. This is a session for you, all of you here. My name's Barry Green. I've been working around the internet since the mid-'80s. Been fortunate to work with some really cool organizations and great people through my career. It just happens to know I got a lot of experience in building networks, building ISPs, building exchange points, building protocols and technology and things like that. So, and along the way, I've got a lot of a different experience of like how to protect against attacks, because that's what happens with it. When you got humans interacting, you have the good. We like lots of good, and then you have the bad and the ugly. And this is kind of like part of the internet. What we're going to be doing in this session here is walking through DDoS resiliency, kind of like a workshop. This is one part that I just updated of a week-long workshop of different materials that we break apart. I usually do these at Apricot, and then others take the materials, and you may see this at Afrinic or AFNOG or one of the NOGs in Africa and things like that, because we collaborate and share within the community, the people who kind of like to teach and do things like that. So that's kind of where you see these materials with it. There's three key things that are going to be covered: understanding our DDoS threat. And this is a DDoS threat it's kind of a little bit different, because sometimes you'll hear DDoS presentations and it's very North American centric or European centric. But a lot of my big backbone experience is Asia Pacific, orientation, which is very similar to like Africa, Latin America, where you get like, okay, you behind these transoceanic cables, and you have to protect interests and assets, so you don't have to do in North America. So this will be a little bit of a slant on it, because it's something that I, grew up on building backbones on, where you're really dependent on those transoceanic links. We're going to talk about what's changed with the DDoS miscreants and give some insight on that, so you can help, because understanding what your threat is helps you to actually prepare your architectures. And then we're going to use a technique where you build your DDoS playbook. So instead of like sitting there and saying, I need to build a DDoS solution first, what we do is we build a playbook. And I'll explain the reason for that. Now, there's going to be lots of pointers in this presentation. So whether you download it now or download it later, there's lots of links to good materials with it. You don't have to go out there and pay anybody to get like DDoS expertise. Those of us who help out to protect the internet, we will help you. So I'm one of the resources out there. Rich, who's coming on later, is another person who will help you, right? Because we are all in this together, right? If your network is under threat, then my network is under threat. So we're all in this together. So we help each other out. So if you get some vendor says, oh, you got to pay for a workshop, you probably come to us, come to your peers, and we will help you out with that. This material, if you haven't heard of it before, Traffic Light Protocol is a tool that we've created in the industry that allows us to say, what classification do we need to keep it away from the bad guys, right? That's what it's the intent here. Like TOP red, keep it really tight. We don't want the bad guys to know about it. TOP clear, share it. Share this material around. So if you got friends and other peers who couldn't make it, you could say, hey, check these slides out, check out the video, share it out there. So this is TOP clear. We don't care if the bad guys know about it, because the bad guys pretty much know about it. Now, if you had a DOS attack right now, I always kind of like to start with this. Number one, don't panic. DOS attacks happen for years. They will keep on happening. Sometimes they happen like quick. I'll explain why, like what's happening with the Russians, what we call privateers, and sometimes they happen persistently, but there is help out there. So don't panic. You can reach out. So also trust your own people. Sometimes you get a DOS attack and you go like, what did my people do? They didn't do anything. Trust your people. And that's one of the things I've experienced over the years, is the people who know your network best are the people who are running your network today, right? You don't need to parachute in people right away, right? Reach out to your peers. Now, your peers would be your competition of your ISPs. So reach out to your ISPs, because we all are in this together. And then we also got the different CSIRT teams, right, that you can reach out to. So reach out to the community. People will step up and help each other out. A classic example of that is there's this classic story back in 2008 when Estonia got attacked by a bunch of Russian activists. Estonia was protected because Estonia, a friend of mine, Medica Keo, was sitting there in the SOC in Estonia, and the attack happened. And what did she do? She called me up. It was the middle of the night for me in California. Called me up and said, Estonia is under attack. We need help. So I rolled out of bed, went over, connected to a whole peer community and say, Estonia is under attack. And everybody went to work helping them out. Collaborate. Collaboration is important. And then give your team time to get the work done. During a DDoS attack, sometimes it's not going to be solved right away. Let the team get the work done even afterwards. And this is what we're talking about with focusing on building a run book or a playbook. Now, these slides, if you lose the link, just come to my site, senkey.org. Senkey.org is special in a sense of it's focused towards helping individuals in different networks scale the network, prepare it, make it more resilient. You know, here's alerts. Sometimes I'll blog about something. If you see me blog about something and say, hey, you need to go protect yourself, it usually means there's something TLP red going on. We can't say why, but also Barry will put a blog out on something and you say, oh, I better check my network, right? And we'll talk about an example of one of those. So this is a site, just senkey.org, you know, this is what to put out there. So if you have a question though, I got the chat open in front of me, so I'll be watching there. Just type in a question if you have it. So as you come up with a question with it, drop it into the chat in the Zoom right here. And you know, we can pause and answer the question and jump around with it. And I'm not quite sure if the admins are going to open up where people can speak their questions later, but you can chat. We can start with that. And then at the end, we can see if we can open the mic up and have a conversation. All right, so the world's changed. We used to have cyber wars, but people just didn't talk about it, right? You know, they said like, oh, wow, China is doing all this, living off the land in telecommunications networks on Guam. Wow, it's a shock. Okay, that's been happening since I've been on the internet, you know, in the early days when it was like, you know, oh, a 64 KB backbone connection. Not gigabit, 64 KB backbone connection, right? It was those early days with it. So this is kind of like, what's new is once the tanks roll across the border in Ukraine, everything became much more active and visible, right? So you had Michael Snowden, his releases, what the US is doing, and then we got stuff what China's doing, and everybody's doing it. So just understand that this is not a good guy, bad guy. This is just a world in different nation states doing their things. And everybody here, you know, since this is an orientation with the African Internet Summit, a lot of times you guys are caught in a crossfire, right? That's one of the things that's interesting with it. And just because you're not, you know, one of the physical targets like Ukraine, you get caught up with it, right? And there's examples with it. Now, what I like to do, thinking about the miscreant threats, who's the threat vectors out there? Cyber criminals, obvious. What are their motivation? Make money, right? That's what a cyber criminals does. A cyber criminal doesn't do anything unless there's some sort of financial gain behind it. So remember that. There's no point for a cyber criminal to do anything unless they can make money off of it. Now, a cyber criminal can get on your network and find out, I don't know how to make money. They're still on your network. They can sell access to your network because they got in. They just couldn't figure out how to monetize, how to figure out how to get money out of you, right? So if they can't do that, you're still at risk. But a cyber criminal, their goal is money. Nation states, it's up to the country. What's their intent? All sorts of things. Just think about it. But you are the battle space, the nation states. You are the battle space. You are the battleground on a network. More so now than it was even in the past. And nation states, what do? They hire corporations. Snowden did not work for the United States government. Snowden worked for a contractor for the United States government. China, each of the state agencies, the PLA, the state security, you know, the Xinhua, they all have contractors and universities. Same thing with the Russians. The Russians hire contractors, right? So they all hire contractors and things like that. So the corporate world is tied up right inside with the nation state interest, and they're contracted out, right? Then you have the political protesters out there, and you have this new group out there, which I call the privateers, because you have these nation states, they can't really hire the corporates, but they go out there and commission people to go out there and kind of like the old pirate ships, privateers, like, England and kind of like the Queen Elizabeth time would commission privateers to go out and raid the Spanish galleons, right? Well, that's what KillNet, that's what Anonymous Sudan is now, right? They're the DDoS privateers that are commissioned by Russia in some way, shape, or form and given out targets, right? So that's kind of like, it's kind of like a combination of the corporate threats and nation states. So that's our threat actors. This is what you think about of who's going after, and you have to think about what could happen around it to threaten your network and your business when you build up a DDoS resiliency plan. But no matter what, remember, the key thing is that computers don't do DDoS. Let me say that again. Computers do not do DDoS. People take the computers and use them to commit DDoS, right? So if you put an AK-47 and put it on the ground, AK-47 isn't going to fire at you. Somebody's going to pick that AK-47 up and shoot. So what happens a lot in the industry, and it frustrates me, people start talking about, wow, look at this DDoS attack. And it's like a bank robbery, right? Bank robbery happens. And at the end of the day, the sheriff gets up to give a report on the bank robbery. And he says, okay, so the bank robbers had this AK-47 and it had a pink stock and it had this ammo and it had a 40-round magazine and it had this like this. And the reporters listening to that will go, what? Who are the bank robbers? How much money did they steal? Are they still out of threat? We don't care about the gun they had. What are you going to do to catch them, right? The people. It's people they want to go after. But what happens when you read things in the industry, they start talking about, oh, here's a DDoS attack, and now it's a packet per second attack versus a volumetric attack, and go like, okay, who is it? Why are they doing it? What's their intention, right? It's all about the people. So that's one of the things that I emphasize over and over again, is that it's the people you have to protect yourself, and people you have to, go after with it. And this is what the KillNet crew is all about. The KillNet is about identifying, anonymous Sudan and things like that. This sort of trend of like state actors hiring these kind of like external privateers, is that really cyber war or not? That's an interesting sort of thing that we'll have to pan out with it. Now, will this ever end? No. The way I kind of teach everybody about DDoS attacks and ransomware attacks and things like that, it's a force of nature. If you have to be interconnected with the world. I mean, you could be unplugged from everything and be totally isolated and live isolated, right, wherever. But that's not what we're doing as human beings. Human beings, we are interconnected like crazy. And as long as we're interconnected like crazy, that means we're going to have, these sort of criminal activities and state actors and things like that. And it's just a force of nature. It's going to happen. If you live in a hurricane zone, if you live in Florida in the United States, you're going to get hit by a hurricane. It's not if, it's like when you will get hit by a hurricane. It's going to happen someday. If you live in the Midwest in the United States, you're going to get hit by a tornado. It's not if, you will get hit. Where I live in California, in San Francisco area, we will get hit by an earthquake. It's a force of nature, right? So this is a cyber nature, sort of thing with it, right? So it's just going to happen. And the thing is, the world's not built this way. Here's a nice map. It got lines, different countries. That's not the internet. The internet is everything all shed together. Right? So we're a group of autonomous systems that all tied together, right? So it doesn't really matter, we can't really sanction. It's all tied together, interconnected. So that means whenever there's a cyber war out there, and right now we have one hot cyber war. The one hot one is obvious, Russia and Ukraine. Then you have a semi-hot between India and China. So a lot of people don't realize there's a big thing going on between India and China because of the fight over their border, right? And then you have back and forth between China and the United States, right? So you have two passive cyber wars, and then you got one hot cyber war, which means all of you're either targeted, which you probably won't be targeted being in Africa, or your collateral damage say, whoops, I didn't mean to hit you and take out your network. or you avoided it, which is most of the time you avoid it, right? But what you're defending against is that collateral damage. And every now and then, you never know, you know, we'll talk about places like Costa Rica. Costa Rica, the whole country got shut down. You couldn't get money out. You couldn't go to the store. You couldn't get gas. You couldn't do it. The whole country was shut down. Affiliate ransomware crews on Conti went out there, and everybody thought, me included, we're all helping out Costa Rica, trying to recover from this attack from the Conti ransomware crew. And we thought that, oh, wow, we got to help out. It's a retaliation because of Russia, because somebody in the Costa Rican government said, yeah, we're going to sign up with the United States and European Union on supporting Ukraine. And all of a sudden this happened. Everybody thought it was related to politics. It wasn't. Actually, what was really happening was Conti was breaking apart because the Ukrainians and the Russians and the Conti crew needed to break apart their two criminal operations. That's what happened. But they took down a country, right? Why Costa Rica, right? Of all places, right? So this is one of the things where collateral damage, right? So given all this, how can you plug into this? Like, you know, this all the information I've talked about so far is coming from public information and information that is being put out by different CSIRT, national CSIRT organizations. And national CSIRT organizations put out a lot of really good intel. And everybody here, this is part of your homework, is to subscribe to these advisories. So later on, I'll point out where you can actually subscribe to all of these advisories that give you updates of what is going on, so you can go look at your network and say, how do I protect myself so I don't become collateral damage? Because what they do when they put an advisory out, say like today, AusCert, Australian CERT, you got to sign up to the Australian CERT team, all right? The ACSC team. So they'll put out an alert, right, and say, here's the things you need to do. Very succinct, very easy to read. Compared to the United States, is very bureaucratic, right? The CISA reports. I like reading the Australians first, right? And you'll get these recommendations, all TOP white, go and do these. What they can't tell you is all the things that we're really doing. They went into a network and actually figured out what was going on with the threat actors. And they figured out, here's the things that they got in. If they were able to put this block in and this block in, the bad guys would not have been able to get into the network. Now, they can't tell you all that TLP red investigation. What they can do is give you, go do these controls, go check your network and do this, right? That sort of thing, right? So this is kind of like the alerts coming out there, right? Because what they'll do is they'll go in and some organization will call for help. We need help. And they'll come in there and do investigation to different groups, right? And so this is an example of the groups, what they call the Five Eyes: Canada, United States, UK, New Zealand, and Australia, right? It's the five, they all kind of collaborate with each other. And then they'll collaborate with each other and say, here's the things we found, and then they'll put a joint advisory. So anytime you see a joint advisory from them, I always look at it. I go look at my networks I'm taking care of, and I go do it, right? This is like top priority of what I do. And because a lot of those sort of techniques, whether it's a ransomware, APT, or DDoS, you know, it's serious. So even though this is a DDoS theme, there you know, a DDoS could be not just throwing packets at something, it can be going in and locking down your whole network with encryption. That's also a DDoS, right? People don't view ransomware as a DDoS type, right? Now, the reason why there's so much effort with national CSIRTs to do this is because everything is interconnected. With everything interconnected, all right, oh, we just did a attack against a power plant. We get an attack against the public transportation. We get an attack against medical facilities. People have been dying from these attacks, medical facilities. Ransomware locks up everything. Emergency rooms shut down. Patients in the emergency room die, right? So this is not just like, oh, we need to do it to make sure we can actually do games. No, this is actually life impacting. So the things we're talking about right now are things that you got to remember. You got to protect your network. And if you're an ISP, protect your customers, because it is life impacting now. That's how interconnected we are. Now, take a few minutes and you can drop in some questions in here. I'll keep an eye out for questions, but we'll go ahead and continue through this. So remember, you can just drop the question in the chat. I'll keep an eye on it. All right. So let's talk about DDoS. Let's focus something on DDoS. Let's talk about basics here, on understanding, you know, kind of like grade school essentials. And I'm always surprised. You get people who are like specialists in big companies who do anti-DDoS. I go like, they don't understand the principles. And I'm really shocked. It says, oh, yeah, I get really shocked. But so right now I'm going to teach you things that some of the experts and some of the big anti-DDoS companies don't know. All right. Like number one, oh, we stopped the biggest DDoS attack in the world. The problem is, how can I get a terabit per second of attack down a link and hit an ISP in Kenya? It's not going to work. You can't get terabit per second going down a gigabit per second, going down a megabits per second. It doesn't work out. The mechanics doesn't work out. But yet you'll get people talking about the biggest attack, the biggest attack. It frustrates those of us who are like been doing DDoS architecture and DDoS resiliency and going after the bad guys for years. We get so frustrated with these bragging rights sort of stuff with it. Now, why do we get frustrated with it? Because this is kind of like the mechanics, whether it's a packet per second, a bits per second, whether it's a low-level attack or a high-level attack. What you'll have is a bunch of attack sources. And the attack sources will move down the chain from where the source is at all the way down to the target. All right. And what the source sends and what the target can receive is never a match, because what will happen as you move across the network, you'll have packet per second limitation, you'll have buffer bloat, you'll have route and queuing, you'll have congestion, you have oversubscription. You have all these different elements, what we call DDoS attenuation. So even though you have a theoretical 8 times 100 megabits per second, by the time you get down from X to X minus Y, the attenuation will happen, so it will be less. But at some point, you're going to start having damage. At some point, that's when the DDoS kicks in. And that's the DDoS aggregation point, the point where everything starts to kick in and hit it. And so when you go out there, you know, and architect a DDoS solution, depending on what you do, you have to be mindful of where the attacks are coming from and what you're defending against, right? So you know, because these can all aggregate together these capabilities with it. So you kind of view this as kind of like this fat cone, because one of the techniques you want to do is you want to take the point of where the aggregation, where all the packets, all the attack, when you got something like a intensive, packet per second or a volumetric attack, come in, there's a point where, okay, that's where I'm going to be vulnerable. Like in a lot of cases in deployments in Africa, in Asia, Latin America, it's going to be on the European or the US side of the transoceanic link. You don't want to take all the packets and bring it across your transoceanic link and then drop them. You want to drop them on the other side. So that's why you see a lot of ISPs in Africa, they actually have a mini backbone in Europe, right? You'll find these mini backbones in Europe where they connect up and they peer, but they also put DDoS defenses at that point before they go across the transoceanic links. So that's playing around with architecture to make sure you don't have a DDoS aggregation, on the African side of the local side of the transoceanic link. But it also explains, when you think about this, what happens with the bragging. You'll get Akamai and Cloudflare go out there, oh, I got the biggest, oh, I got the biggest, I got the biggest. What they're actually saying is, yeah, we are connected directly to these cloud infrastructure. And in the recent couple of years, the bad guys, for different reasons, because we've been, the industry has been going after the DDoS miscreants. They've been doing these proxies in cloud operators. And the cloud operators are directly connected on parent points or directly connected to each other at Equinix or other places. So you got really big bandwidth, and then they block it at that point. Well, that's good that they block it at that point, but does that mean that attack would have terabit per second would have gone all the way down to megabit per second? No, it wouldn't have, right? It's just the measurement point is at a different point. They're stopping the attacks as close to the source as possible. and they're measuring that. So that's all you know, don't get fearful by these sort of things. They're just, Akamai and Cloudflare are blocking it right next to the proxy sources and cloud operators. All right. So to give another example of this, you know, not picking on Safaricom, I could have picked any of the autonomous systems all over Africa, because you go out there and you pull those up with bgp.he.net and you can say, here's the AS map, but this is what you're protected against, right? You kind of think through, where do I need to put this? And this is why several, you know, a whole bunch of ISPs, you know, and I did this when I was running networks in Asia Pacific. I have my anti-DDoS and my scrubbing on the US side and the European side, because I had Singapore, I had, you know, backbone connections going in both directions, right? So if I was doing it today, I would also have it on the Hong Kong side to protect against traffic coming out of China, because it's much more complicated of where you need to put your defenses. So if you have questions on that, drop it into the chat. You know, hopefully this is helpful to everybody over here. And since we had some new people come in, just in case here, let me just drop this in here. If you didn't get it, because I don't know whether new people can come in with it, can get it. But that's your the link to the slides, so you can see the slides and things like that and download them. All right, so now playbook. Now, if you don't have a DDoS architecture written down, if you don't have a really good DDoS plan worked out, don't worry about it. This is kind of like a technique I teach now of how to get going right away, because some people say, oh, let's build a DDoS architecture, but the problem is you can get DDoSed in the next minute. What do you do then, right? So this is why you kind of go through and say, let's start building the playbook with what we have today, because you can do so much with what you have today in your network, right? And this is between this session and later on with the session that Rich is going to teach, and teaching some of the stuff going on with it, right? So right before we dive into that, I got a good question here in the Q&A section. Paul's asking, do you think organizations should have their anti-DDoS protection on-premise, or should ISPs safeguard, or should ISPs safeguard the customers? So I think it is always going to be depend on your network, but the way I do things from experience, I'm doing this for decades, is I have anti-DDoS capability built into my network. I make sure all my routers and switches going towards my customers, go on upstream. I have remote trigger black hole, I have flow spec, I have source space remote trigger black hole, all deployed. So that's like, it's part of a toolkit. The way you think about that, this is the playbook section of the workshop, but if you see some of the other sections of the workshop, what I teach is to have a toolkit. So if you look at a carpenter doesn't have a hammer and use a hammer to actually cut wood. They have a hammer, they have a saw, they have a screwdriver, they have a lathe, they have, they have a whole toolkit. They have a sander, right? That's how you think about DDoS resiliency in any sorts of security on the network operators. You have your toolkit and you know how to use your tools. So I have all the things deployed on my network. I get NetFlow running on my network. And then depending on whether I need it or not, I have something I can do to scrub. Whether it's a scrubbed service, like, one of the scrubbing boxes you can put on your network, I always have that sort of thing with it. So it's on my network. Now, I may choose as a product manager to sell capability to my customers, right? Or I do a scrubbing service. So then I have a DDoS business, right? Then upstream of me, right? Say if I'm in Singapore, I would deploy this, in Japan and US and Europe, right? And Australia, where attacks would come in from. I would have defensive tools out there. Now, I could do it my own, put my own boxes in there, or I can subscribe to somebody, right? Subscribe to an Akamai, Cloudflare, or NetScout, right? Like there's a whole bunch of commercial players I can subscribe to. And those are sort of things that as we go through this playbook methodology, you kind of start thinking through, what do I really need? Because one of the things I notice is some people say, oh, I'll just go out there and buy this commercial service and that's it. And then I look at the network and they don't have any of the remote trigger black holes. They haven't protected their BGP. They haven't protected the GRE tunnels. I go like, oh, so I just poke this with a low level attack and the whole thing collapses, right? So it's very important to kind of go through, here's my architecture. Here's where I got everything across my network. So Paul, that's a good question there. And now helping you solve that, question, let's kind of walk through, this whole playbook methodology. So one of the things I've been finding over the last 10 years is people will build a playbook, they'll hire some consultant to do a playbook, and they don't update it. And what goes on today is there's so much happening with innovation inside of a company, with the DevOps world, and it's so easy to actually make something new and you deploy it and your network changes all the time, which means your playbook needs to change all the time, right? So one of the key things with all this is your playbook is never static. You got to constantly update it. So you start with this method, use what you got in your network today, and then iterate and iterate. In other words, you take the next step and take the next step. You constantly improve each step doing improvement, right? So with this, I'm assuming you don't have a playbook now, right? So you say, okay, I don't have a playbook. I'm going to start opening up a document and I'm going to start doing a playbook with it, right? And so, again, it's not once or twice a year that you update this. Is every time there's a change in my network, let's go through it. And also, it's interactive. I would do playbooks where people say, oh, you're going to come in and write the playbook for us. And then the customer would get surprised because they say, oh, no, what we're going to do is we're going to have a whole team together with different people in the company. And then we're going to go out there and I'll hand out cards to say, how do we break the network? How do we attack the network? How do we do this to the network? And everybody participates in figuring out all the different stress points and what can happen to the business if this gets attacked with a DOS, or somebody hits this database, or somebody hits this API. We get all these, ideas on there, and I work with the team, and then people kind of work together with it. And then we put together a plan, and then we run through a tabletop exercise. I run through, says, okay, if this happened, what do we do? Right? And then the team is involved. So then you got a lot of brains working together to actually build your playbook. Well, 3 months later, bring the team back together and says, okay, we've deployed this, what's next? What else? Let's do another round of it. And then, you get more ideas coming out with it. So in my, some of the most resilient organizations, you'll find that they do something like that. They rely upon the team that's there and they tap into everybody's brain power on the team, right? So this is the sort of thing like, you ask the team, what can happen, to the business? What can they really be, somebody kind of, extort us? Like if a cyber criminal says they can take us out, what would they try to threaten us with, right? Because you think like criminal and jump ahead with that, right? So that's the sort of things with it, right? Because in the cyber criminal space, if somebody wanted to do a DDoS extortion, which means that they will say, here's a sample attack, pay me money or I'm going to do even more attacks, right? The idea is you make it hard for them. So if you have an exercise where you have your whole, people inside the organization sit down around a whiteboard and you say, okay, how can we make it work? How can we make them work hard? If it's a cyber criminal, make them work hard. Because if they work hard, it's not worth the money. It's return on investment, return on criminal investment. You want to make them work harder to get in, and they'll be less likely to go after you, right? And then if they're a dumb criminal, they'll try something and it won't work, and just sit there and laugh at them, right? Because he did your defenses. So you start with the basics, right? So you kind of figure out who can do what inside the organization, and you say, okay, if the attacker did this, here's what we would do. If the attacker did this, here's what we would do. And this is what you get with the playbook, right? So you got a playbook idea with it. And in the beginning, you just start out, you may not have had many different DOS attacks to think about, but you will get DOS attacks. That's just, remember, force of nature. The DOS attacks will happen. And then you go and make sure you spend the time to actually review what happened. What worked, what did not work. How can we improve ourselves? No blame with it, because you never know. You can do it the best you can do, but then it still happens, right? So if you've been watching the news, you've been seeing Caesars and MGN get broken into of ransomware attacks. And they have a lot of money and a lot of expertise put into trying to defend their networks. And criminals still got in. Why? Because it's a gambling organization, and they can go after a lot of money. What they were trying to do is they're trying to break into the slot machines and make money off the slot machines. So again, cyber criminals don't do anything unless there's a monetary gain with it. In that case, you had a lot of defenses, you had a lot of money involved, and that was their motivation, right? So it's like, again, you're not fighting against packets, you're fighting against people, right? With your playbook. So when you play, you say, somebody wants to attack us to do this, and here's what we do, right? And that starts your playbook up, right? Now, with all this, when an attack does happen, this 6 phases approach, this started way back in 2001 during the Mafia Boy attack, where I was doing a post-mortem talking to the different big carriers, and the ones who actually defended themselves quite well, they prepared. They had like a playbook. They had like test tools. They trained their team, right? They had their knocks ready to go. And then when the attack happened, they were identified what type of attack it is, classify it, what type of, what's going on with the attack, trace back, figure out where it's coming from. Then they did a reaction, a mitigation, ACLs. And then when the attack was over, they sat down and said, okay, how can we do things better? Post-mortem stage, right? So this 6 phases approach then updates at the post-mortem, it updates your playbook. Now your playbook is better. Now you're ready for the next one, right? So that's kind of like the phase of how we do things with the playbook with it, right? So that's, that part of it. But one of the things, because attacks happen eventually, but what do you do now? Like, okay, I build my playbook. I'm starting my actions to kind of protect myself. What else should I do? Watch the news. Watch the different operations groups. Talk to your local CSIRT team and say, hey, give us the latest you found out about different DDoS briefings. So here's a DDoS briefing, right? So, Aotearoa, right? That's the place I visit quite often, down in New Zealand, right? That's New Zealand, right? And what happened was, this is TLP green, because this is the stuff I sanitize. It's not all the stuff that's TLP red with it. But for some reason, we had these threat actors decided to pick on New Zealand for an entire month. And it uncovered some things to think about what people can do with DDoS attacks that a lot of people don't, forgot that you can do these sort of things with it, right? So you can use a report like this to say, okay, let me look at my playbook. What if they did something like this to me in my country? Because if some major threat actor can just pick on New Zealand, because New Zealand's nice and it's way down under, and then they're not there's no counter threat. Like New Zealand's not going to go attack anybody, right? So in 2020 fourth quarter, they had extortion attacks hit New Zealand. Why? Nobody really knows, right? But you had extortions. Why pick on New Zealand? But in September, 2 years ago, 2021, the whole month of September 2021, I was working with all sorts of organizations down there as they're getting hit with these DDoS attacks, and against high profile, Kiwi Bank, ANZ, NZ Post, MetaServe, the stock exchange, the Ministry of Prime, different ministries are hit. It's just over and over and over and over again. Why they were going after? And a good summary of this is Ian Welch, who's a reporter in New Zealand. He kind of go like, why are they doing this? Nobody can figure out, because it wasn't extortion. There wasn't like any threats. New Zealand didn't insult anybody, right? This is 2021. So you didn't have the Ukraine war, right, going on, right? So you had stuff like that. But, we looked at it, right? So we were thinking, why are they attacking? Could it be nation states, wanted to disrupt stuff. It could be criminal gangs. Well, we didn't see indication of that. It could be ransomware. There was no ransomware. So ransomware incentivization is, I put ransomware into a company and then I say, pay up or I'm going to release the data. And you say, no, I'm not going to pay you. And then they hit you with a DDoS attack. That's a DDoS incentivization. So a ransomware crew will hit you with a DDoS attack and say, pay me. So it's like a criminal who goes to your store and says, pay me your protection money. And you say, no, I'm not going to pay you. Then he comes back with a baseball bat and starts whacking and breaking all your windows, right? That's the equivalent of a ransomware gang hitting you with a DDoS attack. None of that happened. It didn't happen in New Zealand, but attacks still happen. It could be, oh, I'm doing this so I can brag about it. See, I got great tools, because that happens. You have a new DDoS crew and say, look what I can do. Nope, none of that happened. And so it could be egos. We watched the dark web. Hey, did somebody brag about, hey, I attacked New Zealand. I took out New Zealand. Nope, none of that happened. So it could be, okay, you got a lot of DDoS against games. Games are really, really, really big in Asia Pacific and in the United States. And people will like DOS each other, right? Some of the biggest attacks, like I heard one time there was a terabit per second attack against a home in Canada. Huge DOS attack because of some game, right? Because gamers attacking gamers. So gamers attack gamers. Was it that? Nope, wasn't gamers. Maybe it's commissioned by somebody. Nope, wasn't that. All right. So the only thing we can kind of figure out was some nation state crew was using New Zealand as target practice. They were trying to figure out how the tools worked. They were testing the tools on New Zealand because New Zealand couldn't hit back, right? And they're polishing and practicing. They could practice on you. Countries in Africa are in the same position as New Zealand. They could somebody can like go out there and say, hey, let me practice my new tools before I attack America or before I attack Russia or before I attack Iran. Let me practice my tools. This hit the country. So what we found out about that attack, and this is stuff you put into, this is the sort of stuff you can seek out and put into your playbook updates, is that these guys were persistent. They went after it over a month. They tried different attacks. They would monitor the results. They'll pause. Then they'll try something different, right? Then they'll shift. They'll swap the protocols. They want different packet sizes. They tried different DDoS tools. They tried different DDoS ports. So they hit HTTP and email and NTP. They hit all sorts of things. They kept on, let's try this. Let's try that. Let's try this. It went on for hours. Then they take a break and they went and took a nap. They went back, came back up, right? They would sneak different messages into HTTP packets, but the messages really didn't mean anything. We're scratching our head with it. They're like, oh, here's a Bitcoin wallet address, but we traced back that wallet. The wallet was invalid. It was invalid wallet. We didn't know what was going on with it. So they took the breaks and they came back and did something different. Yes, they use Mikotech boxes. Yes, people said, oh, it's a Mikotech, but that was just like once. They use Maris too, which is off of hosting facilities, right? They used everything in inventory. They use CPEs out of Vietnam. They use major Fortune 200s, big, not Fortune 500, 200s, cloud resources that nobody knew that was broken into. And then at the end of the month, they disappeared. This is gone. Disappeared. Haven't heard it since. Everybody's scratching their head. What happened? All right. So that was interesting, right? So people blogged about it, but it was like, this is one of the things that is a good example of all the different things you have to think about in your playbook for DDoS of what can happen to you, right? It's not just like the simulated, like here's a volumetric or a packet per second. They did things like low-level megabit per second against port 179. What's port 179? Oh, that's BGP, right? I don't need a DOS attack to go out there and take out a BGP session. I don't have do a big DDoS attack to actually overload an API, right? And these are the sort of things they kind of tried out. So they tested out with the toolkit with it. So what you can happen with a DOS attack is not just throwing packets. That's a key thing with it. And Rich is going to copy some of this stuff with it. But with all this, there's years ago, Rob Thomas and I came up with the 7 habits of highly effective cyber criminals. Principle number 1, don't get caught. So if you want to be a successful cyber criminal, here's the 7 habits you need to follow. Number 1, don't get caught. You don't want to get caught, right? Which is why you get cyber criminals in places where you can't have international justice to go after them, right? Number 2, don't work too hard. The goal of a cyber criminal is to make money. Number 3, follow the money. Make sure you can make money. Right there, 1, 2, 3, right? Don't get caught. Don't work too hard. Follow the money. If it's too hard to break in, go do some other crime. That's easier, right? You want to, return on investment. If you can't take out the target, move the attack to a couple dependency. Now, what does that mean? Oh, wow, they got a DDoS protecting their network. Oh, that's okay. What's the router one hop above the DDoS protection? Oh, okay, I'll hit that router, right? Or I'll hit the link across the ocean, right? So they can do a trace route too, right? So, you know, if you're building up a DDoS business to protect your customers in your network, you got to be mindful of a smart attacker will say, oh, you have a NetScout. Oh, okay, no problem. I'll hit the routers above the NetScout. Let's see you take care of that one, right? So the bad guys know this, right? Because it's an easier target. They'll do the intel on it, right? They'll always do things cross-jurisdictionally. That means different countries. Makes it hard to law enforcement to go after people, right? That's a principle there. A lot of times they'll go after people who won't prosecute. Now this is changing because the industry, we've been banding together and we've been working to do prosecutions. So you saw like in December and in March, we had, you know, DDoS takedowns, right? So if you're interested in getting involved with that, you got my email address. This is an industry collaborating together, and then we work with different law enforcement, you know, FBI, Secret Service, commercial crimes in UK, Interpol, Europol, right? So this number 6 is we are able to prosecute in the countries we can prosecute, right? Number 7, stay below the pain threshold. So what we mean about that is, you know, a big backbone operator, they will tolerate DDoS as long as it doesn't impact their backbone. If it impacts their backbone, they'll wake up and stop it. So what they'll do is they'll set up the attacks in such a way where the big backbones don't have an incentive to stop it. That's stay below the pain threshold. So this is all in a big write-up. You can go to Senkey, look for 7 habits. It's all in there, right? And this point right here, don't work too hard. Too many miscreants work too hard to achieve the goal, right? And they don't achieve it with it, right? So that's our goal here. Set up your DDoS architecture, have your playbook where you make the miscreants work hard, right, with it. The question with New Zealand is these guys worked really hard. So they weren't cyber criminals because they worked really hard to try out all the tools. So that was the thing with New Zealand is like, you know, which means that somebody who is really dedicated and trying something out, they can really do some really, you know, vicious damage, you know, to an infrastructure with it, to the point of, you know, later on 2020, you know, 2022, you had like with Costa Rica, where, you know, whole countries are impacted of it. So given that, again, type in questions in the chat, you know, let people know. So I'm just going to, I answered live here for that one. So if you guys got other questions, and let me just check. Okay, all right, next. So part of a playbook, 9 points. Number 1, look for those single points of failure. The router, DNS, APIs, right? In the wave of DDoS extortion attacks in 2020, we had a lot of miscreants go after like APIs and DNS and things like that, right? So these, you know, look for these single points of failure. It was like a surprise when financial institutions and they found that the APIs that were not behind DDoS protection got targeted. How did they find that out? Well, they probably, you know, did some HTTP, you know, going to connect into the application. And then with the application, they followed the path of the connections and say, oh, here's this call over here. It's going over this API. This is a different organization. This whole app, this banking organization depends on this API. I'm going to attack the API. It will take down the whole thing, right? And you don't have to have big bandwidth saturation DOS attacks. You just have to have enough to take out the DevOps capability. A lot of people don't think that that's the sort of thing we need to do, but that's what was one of the core themes in the 2020 fourth quarter attacks, is the DDoS, a good DDoS extortionist will go after these single points of failure. So a lot of people call like, wow, you know, I never thought of that. And this is sort of exercise to do where you get your own team together. I mentioned about one of the DDoS exercises is get somebody to come in, be a facilitator, get a whiteboard, and different people across the company. And you say, okay, how can things break? What will be really damaging the break? What can I attack? Low level, high level, just throw bad packets at it, things like that. And this is what happened like Apollo 1. So this is a picture of Apollo 1 disaster, where we had 3 astronauts die. And the root cause, they all say, was failure of imagination. We never imagined that that sort of failure could happen, right? In this case, the failure of imagination was that they had the whole capsule full of pure oxygen. They thought that would be the best way of keeping things safe inside the capsule. Well, pure oxygen, you had a spark, a fire, and the 3 astronauts died. They never thought of that. They never thought through that. So that's the whole thing about, kind of, the best way of countering the failure of imagination is you have a lot of diverse minds sitting around the table. Let's review the playbook. What's all the ways that things can break? What's going to go after it? You build up with it. So here's an example of it. A lot of people go out there and say, hey, I deploy something on the edge. I do an edge DDoS service. I do an edge WAF service. I do an edge, bandwidth acceleration service. I can get my services out there. But see, what a lot of people don't do is they don't map out what's really going on behind the scenes, because when you get an end user and say, hey, I need to go out there, it uses a DNS resolver. The resolver goes to an authoritative service. The authoritative service says, okay, where's my edge service? Well, that will go out there and say, okay, here's a CNAME. Here, go to the edge one, all right? Then I go to another DNS authoritative service. Where's my edge? And then that will eventually give you a pointer that says, here's the edge, connect to the edge. Does it stop there? No, the edge then goes, oh, I need to go out there and connect to the origin, right? So I go and connect up to and say, hey, where's my origin? Oh, my origin's over here, right? So all that signaling, that's a typical DNS signaling. Like if you connected up to Cloudflare, Akamai, Fastly, any of the cloud edge operator sort of stuff, this is the signals behind the scenes. And what I've seen a lot of resiliency plans where they don't even think about, okay, how am I going to protect the DNS chain? How am I going to protect the NTP chain? How am I going to protect these API chains, right? They don't think through that, right? And so all it takes is I go, oh, let me attack this. Host systems down. Oh, I got this web application firewall to protect my service. And boom, I hit the DNS authoritative because it's sitting there behind one firewall, and boom, whole thing goes down. Well, your WAF is broke. What was the point then, right? Because your WAF is broke, right? Or your DDoS protection was broke, right? So this is the things of like, the way to kind of think through this is you get a lots of good consultation and think about what can break with it, right? So that's point 1. As part of preparing your playbook is think of all the unimaginable sort of stuff. And it iterate. Every time you go through an experience, you'll sit there and go through an exercise and you'll update and you write down, update your plan, say, cool, okay. And then you'll be like out doing a run, doing a walk, you're out with your family, and you go like, oh, wait a minute, here's another scary thing. Oh, I got a scary thing here. Oh, okay, let me go add this to my playbook because there's another scary thing that happened. Next thing is talk about, what your ISPs, what your transit providers, what capability do they have, right? Because, it's a collective. When you're attacked, everybody's attacked on the internet, whether the people want to realize it or not. So the good partners will say like, yeah, if you get an attack, we're going to be there for you. We're going to help you out here. No, we're not going to charge you for like a big DDoS protection service. We're, if you want all that, yes, we can put scrubbers and things like that, and you can pay rent on the scrubbers. But remote trigger black hole, back tracing, working with other ISPs to do things, protecting against BGP hijacks. You ask them, are they manners compliant, right? Are they doing the things they're supposed to do from a manners standpoint, right? So you work with the ISP. And then when you do some tabletops with your playbook, you test the numbers, make sure I'm supposed to call this transit provider I'm getting bandwidth from for a DOS attack. Let me call that number. Here's an exercise. Do they pick up the line? Can I get them to do a remote trigger black hole? Can I get them to go out there and do a back trace to figure out which peer is this attack coming from, right? So you test that. You don't want to wait until the attack happens to test your communications, right? So you got to make sure you do that. And so here's a bunch of the fundamentals. This is in, again, on synckey.org. There's a whole DDoS workshop. There's all these materials about different guides that we've written over the years as part of the community for like how to prepare yourself. And these 12 areas are things that you would ask, how is your NOC set up? And this is things you do to prepare yourself too. These are all the different things with it. So this is One of the pointers I'll send you guys over to is the 2021 Apricot tutorials, or the 2022 Apricot tutorials. So, you know, so there's a whole week of, and this is module 6 out of those materials. So you can think of it. This is just module 6 of like 10 modules, right? So, number one, I mean, the other thing is don't overestimate your infrastructure. You know, a lot of times it's, oh yeah, I got plenty of bandwidth. Oh yeah, I got big routers. You know, it's funny because, you know, over the past 10 years, you know, it's been simple flood bandwidth attacks. Again, the DDoS guys don't work hard. Reflective DDoS worked well for many, many years. It's getting harder because we're going after the DDoS reflection community, right? So the industry, again, if you're interested in coming in and joining our effort, you know, just ping me, you can join our effort. But we've been going after the miscreants. And they shifted. So in 2020, they shifted. They shifted to fragmented packets. They fragmented, you know, went through proxies. They hitting protocols directly. You know, they're not doing saturation attacks. They're doing more, you know, targeted attacks, you know, where they're overloading a DNS server, right? So they're being more crafty about what they're doing, right? And that woke a lot of people up because all of a sudden they realized, oh, wow, my DNS wasn't upgraded and it went down. That's not good, right? So don't overestimate your infrastructure. Always kind of like as part of your playbook, you kind of say, what's my DDoS architecture? What's my capacity models? How much can I do? How much can I absorb? Oh, wow, wait a minute. Somebody just added this brand new service. I got these servers over here. The amount of packet per second calculations they did to support my business is off. I need to upgrade my line cards or my routers or my bandwidth. I got to retune my network because, you know, you got innovation happening on your network all the time. All right. So, you know, and think beyond, you know, what they call the core dependencies with it, right? Of activities, right? So you got these things where, again, you know, security teams are always an afterthought. They're never told, or the NOC teams, operations teams are an afterthought. And you got an organization that added more capability and, oh, wow, you know, my system can't handle it anymore, right? So it's like a wake-up call from that sort of stuff with it. And you kind of think about, you know, the simple things. Like one of the shockers out there was we have 400,000 port 179s opened. And this is kind of like one of your homework, all right? If you have not signed up to the shadow server reports, you need to sign up to the shadow server reports because they are free, a part of cyber civil defense, and they will give you an insight on your network. And one of the reports in there that we opened up is on open port 179 for BGP, because we had 2 attacks. Again, this is down in New Zealand, 2 attacks hidden port 179. Port 179 is quite easy. If you leave port 179 open, where I can get packets to it from anywhere in the internet, it's very easy to take down that BGP session. Now, what happens? The BGP session stops. Your internet stops because your routes get rejected. The BGP session resets. It comes back up. Packets flow to the 179 again. It goes down again. Routes get withdrawn. Comes back up. Goes down again. Comes back up. Now your upstream starts saying, oh, route flap. Let's start doing route flap dampening. Let's start dampening that connection. Oh, now you're dealing with different upstream ISPs where it's doing route flap dampening on your prefixes. Okay, now I've got a complicated attack because you got this DDoS attack going in. Your BGP session's flapping up and down, right? You're going like, what's going on? All because people are focusing on RPKI, right? Oh, let's do RPKI. You got to do RPKI, but let's not put, you know, the infrastructure ACLs, general purpose TTL mechanism, isolate the connection, you know, look at TCP AO. These are all different things you do to protect the BGP session. And we got now 400,000 port 129s wide open. If somebody wanted to take out the internet, there you go. We're dead. you know, that would be a massive attack with out there to have all that going out there. So this is your homework with there. Now, I did a write-up with this. There'll be more write-ups. This is another workshop sort of stuff I'm adding in there. So you'll probably hear more of this out there. But this is something you can protect your network right now. Protect it right now, that actually protect yourself with it. So let's see. Let me check here. Questions. Oh, people are putting in some other stuff in there. All right, good. All right. So let me drop this up here. So there's where you can get the reports from. They got dashboard. And the way the Shadow Server works is you subscribe for your network and you get the reports on your network. You don't need to buy an attack surface package, because Shadow Server is better than any of the attack surface commercial companies out there. They give you all sorts of cool stuff that help you protect your network. You know, so you know, I'm essential sort of protections for your network out there. All right. So identify what your business really needs. If you get a DDoS attack, you're going to have to make sometimes a sacrifice. You know, what's critical to your business? What cannot go down, right? So those are sort of things you got to say, okay, if I got a persistent attacker, what's the most essential things I need to keep up and running? And you look at things to say, can I keep things up and running in isolation? Can I keep things up and running where my upstream is disconnected? And this is really, really something to kind of think through from a coupled dependency and your business operations. So Hurricane Maria went through and hit the island of Puerto Rico. And island Puerto Rico was really damaged all over infrastructure, massive damage from the hurricane, right? Or climate chaos consequences. But we also have consequences from the Internet Engineering Task Force, who pushed out there and say, hey, let's go and secure everything because of Michael Snowden, and let's do secure DNS. And so then you had phone systems when people, the cell towers will come back up, but people couldn't connect to WhatsApp, couldn't connect to Facebook, couldn't connect because the DNS was all messed up, right? So you got to look at these coupled dependencies from when you need to recover. And one of the things I emphasize over and over again is go back to the origin of the internet. The origin of the internet, and this is something we can follow up later with. There's a paper that you need to read from the person who is the primary architect, Paul Boran. The primary architect of the internet was not Vint Cerf, love Vint Cerf, and Rob Kahn, all right? Wrote TCP/IP, good, they wrote a protocol, but they weren't, they'll say themselves, we weren't the architects. Paul Boran was the architect. And the architecture was, we create these autonomous systems. And the reason why they're called autonomous systems is they can operate autonomously. So if you run a network and you're an autonomous system, you should be able to operate autonomously. My backbone connections go down and my business operations continue. My essential business operations continue. And then here's how I do my different interconnections. And so much work has been going towards the cloud that they lose sight of that's not how the internet was architected. And as we go into areas where we got climate chaos and we got these cyber wars and we got other things going on, and you have these coupled dependencies and bandwidth, and you say, oh, I'm just going to put everything in the cloud. Well, guess what? Your business can be trash because you can't get to the cloud or the cloud isn't there, right? So this is what you need to do on this part here is, how is my business all tied into all this mesh? What if this disappears? What if that disappears? What do I do? And this is one of the reasons why in the US, you're having starting the migrations out of the cloud, where you have a bunch of critical resources in controlled data centers that are very environmentally resilient in the sense of like hurricanes, tornadoes, floods. They're getting ready for climate chaos, right? And here's the things in the cloud, right? So the certain thing, you know, business organizations as part of the business continuity plan are thinking through that. And that's what you also need to think with the DDoS, because DDoS is part of a business continuity plan. How do you keep your business up and running? And part of keeping that business up and running is how long can you be down? Because DDoS, there's 3 ways the DDoS stops, period. Only 3 ways. Number 1, the bad guy decides to stop it, all right? So like you got these DDoS privateers, they go out there, and a lot of times they just need to prove that they did it. So they hit you for 5 minutes and then they stop. It didn't stop on their own, it just stopped. They decide to stop it. So they decide to stop it. Then sometimes what happens is the community gets together and they start going after them, and they realize, oh, good grief, they're after me. Principle number one, don't get caught. Okay, they stop the DOS attack and start hiding, right? Again, the DDoS threat actor stopped it. Number three, oh, somebody removed the tools from their control. Oh, I have no control. So I'm going to remove the controls. I don't want them to use the command and control to trace back to me, so I'll go and trash the controls. And they stopped it, all right? So all three ways, the person who's launching the attack decided to stop it, all right? So that's how, you know, it's out there. How long it survives and things like that, how long it goes on, is kind of like, what's your acceptable time to mitigation? How long can you survive the attack? If a 5-minute attack happens, are you okay with that? If a 2-hour attack happens, are you okay with that? If it's a multiple day attack, are you okay with that, right? So this is something to talk through from the business people, right? Your executives inside the company says, how long can we stay down? And they may say, no, we can't ever stay down, right? We have to be up all the time. And this is one of the reasons why people will look at the commercial operations to say, because we can't afford to go down. I remember when I was at Cisco Systems and we were trying to convince the community to build DDoS services. Like, you know, the question that was asked, hey, let's do a DDoS service, right? Does it make sense for me? Well, in, you know, 2002, you know, Sprint, AT&T, WorldCom, they didn't know if they wanted to do a DDoS service. So what happened was John Stewart, who used to be the CISO at Cisco, he's now retired. He came up with this idea, let's call in all the account managers. And basically he did a calculation to say, here's our acceptable downtime for Cisco Systems. Here's how much money we would lose per minute with us being down from a DOS attack. And he went up there and says, we would lose this much. We're willing to pay you 10% more on the bandwidth if you do these DDoS services. Well, immediately all three operators says, okay, we're going to launch a DDoS protection service for you, which is, that's what kickstarted the whole DDoS mitigation, you know, industry, because we actually did acceptable time to mitigation. How much does it cost? We communicated that and people saw the business model around it, right? Which goes into, you know, going out and saying you need these services. The reason why these services from the different companies out there exist is because acceptable loss. Going to number 5 is how long is that loss? And then you go and do this part. What happens is a lot of times people go and say, oh, let me go talk to one of the DDoS protection companies. And they don't know some of these others, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So you do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and notice now you start talking to commercial operations. Now you start talking to the vendors, right? So you've done a lot of homework, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in your playbook, right? Your playbook is updating. Then you start talking to the vendors to say, okay, what can you do for me? And you're talking to them from a point of information. You know more what you need as a business, right? It's not guessing. And that makes sure that you don't buy too much. You don't buy what you don't need. You buy what you need for your business. Mindful business decision. Now, would that be correct? Maybe not. May true, all right? That's okay. Things will happen. DOS attack happens. Do your postmortem, improve your playbook, tune your system, all right? That's how we do things out there, right? And you go through and you update your playbook. Now, in building the playbook, here's a recommended book. And you don't really need to do a recommended book. You go out there and Atul, he did a fantastic TED Talk. So I would probably recommend go to his TED Talk on the checklist manifesto. And this has a really African source to it, because what he is, he's a heart surgeon. So if you haven't heard this story, but he's a heart surgeon, right? And as a heart surgeon, he was trying to figure out the mortality rate on the operating table for open heart surgery. And he was noticing that, you know, there was a high percentage in the United States and Canada and Europe. And he was reading the reports about this mortality rate on the operating table. You know, somebody needs open heart surgery, and they die on the operating table. And he's noticing that South Africa was like the lowest. In other words, if you wanted to get open heart surgery, the best place to make sure you don't die on an operating table was South Africa. And he's going like, why is South Africa this way? So he decided to go down and visit in South Africa and went to the operating table or in the operating room. And he was watching in this theater, you know, the operating stuff going on. And he was going like, oh, check this. And he's like, all right, let's go through and let's go through the checklist. And everybody, nurses, the anesthesiologists, the doctors, the support team, everybody had this checklist. They pulled this checklist out. Check 1, check 2, check 3, check 3. Okay, do this procedure. Check, 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 check. Next procedure. Check, check, check. Next procedure. Check, check. And the whole thing, everything was like scripted out as a checklist. And you go like, whoa. So he wrote this book, right? And I found out this book from a buddy of mine who was doing major operations. He was head of operations at Google. He says, Barry, you got to read this book. This is fantastic. Now I started reading it. I go like, this is I was doing this in the Air Force because we did checklists for everything. Check, check, check. If you didn't follow the checklist, you got dinged, you got penalized because you didn't follow the checklist. But this is kind of like a core thing, and watching a TED Talk could give you inspiration with it. And this is kind of how you want to have your playbook set up, as a very much of a checklist, open script. Here's what you do with it. And then you go through exercises with it and practice with it, and then constantly update with it. Checklists are constantly updating with it, right? So that's a key thing to look at that. And you got to make sure it works. You got to exercise it, all right? So minimally set up annual tabletop drills. A couple of times a year is better, right? When you do your tabletop drills, pull in the vendor team, right? And you can pull all sorts of different sorts of tabletop exercises, pull in different scenarios. You can find scenarios online. You can ping me, I'll point you to different scenarios. So, they'll give you like, here's a whole playbook of how to do a tabletop exercise, and you can try it out and you can cut and paste and make your own. Let me give an example of one story with it. So I was working with, at Cisco Systems, I was working with CNN back in '99. And I was doing one of these DDoS workshops and teaching them, how to do playbooks. So this is not a new thing. This presentation, goes all the way back to like 1997 is when I did the first version of it. And so in '99, I was doing a workshop with CNN, and they took it to heart. They built a playbook, and they had an exercise where they had the vendors in. And, we participated with it, right? So Cisco, they had Cisco equipment, CNN, the broadcast, right? And then they had the elections. Remember they had the elections in 2000 where you had Gore and Bush, and right 2 weeks before the elections, they had a very simple tool. So the very simple detection tool to find out if bad guys are scanning your network is you do a VTY access list on your router and you put it into an ACL and you log it and you track it. In those days, it was with MRTG. Today, it will be some much better tools, but it's MRTG. And they had a spike. Somebody was looking at their network going to attack them. And they had a compelling event. They got the elections coming up. Attack CNN website during the elections. So they pressed the button and say, let's activate the playbook. Let's go through. And they called in all the vendors, had everybody ready to do it because they did exercises. It was ready to go. And they saw an event, they pulled everybody in. And so here you had the confusion between Gore and Bush, who won the elections in 2000, plus CNN, everybody going to CNN. So you had everybody going, big surge activity and a DOS attack all at once. 3 things all at once. And CNN kept up and running because they had a playbook, they had a plan, they exercised the plan. They were ready to go, right? So this does work with it. And the reason why it also works, like in the CNN case, is because they collaborated big time. They reached out to everybody, all their upstream ISPs, they had vendors, they exercised, they work with different security organizations. Yeah, it's really, really important, the collaboration part of working with each other and getting to know each other and being able to pick up the phone. The example I gave, there's more people on right now, but the example I gave with Estonia. Estonia gets attacked, Medica KO calls me up. I call people on this one group called NSPSec, and a whole bunch of people started actually helping Estonia. Collaboration. And that just didn't happen. Medica knows that I was doing the work with the service providers. She knows she can call me up. So there was a relationship that we invested in each other. And she picked up the phone, called, And then I knew that I needed to do, because I work with the community of different backbone providers, and they did their part, right? That exists today. Those relationships exist today. If you're not part of those relationships, then reach out, start with your, wherever you're at, who is your competition, right? In Singapore, back when Singapore was starting up the internet days, we had 3 providers. I was over at Singapore Telecom, we had Pacific Internet, we had Cyberway. Every Friday, we met over at the Pacific Internet Cafe, 88 Boat Quay. Every Friday we meet there. All the geeks, we meet there. We're all friends. So when things happen, even though we're 3 competitors, we all work together, right? The same thing like New Zealand. New Zealand was great because they say, okay, I forgot what day, but it's the pub day, right? Everybody quit early, and you had all the competition, all peers, and they met at a pub, and they all, had beers together, right? It's that sort of collaboration that you put into these sort of stuff. You go to the local NOGs. This is a role for a CERT team. If a good, healthy national CERT team is doing their work, they would go put these get-togethers today. Today in Singapore was SG NOG, right? They had the NOG. People, lots of big socialization. It was really fun for me because I would look around and there was like 400 plus people, and I only knew a few of them, which means it's very healthy. It got a lot of new talent in the room, and they're all talking to each other. That's part of this part here of collaboration for impact. So this is probably the most important part, is investing in this, because you can't fight DDoS by yourself. You kind of like do your preparation, work together as a team inside your organization, and you collaborate. You collaborate with it, right? And the link down at the bottom is, you report into the attacks too. You just don't keep it to yourself. You report to other organizations, because we go after them. DD4BC was a extortion crew that's in jail. The 2 people who did DD4BC, they're in jail because the community worked together to go after them, right? So the days where it's like, not the bad guys are being tracked down gradually. All right. So are you ready? Here's some other points for people, right? So where do you start with this? Just start. It doesn't have to be much. And there's this thing of compound interest, where if you do a little bit every day, and every day you're doing a little bit, it starts compounding up. This power of compound action, right? So you have heard about compound interest. This is compound action. You don't have to do a lot. You just do a little every day. Take 30 minutes a day, and here's how I'm improving my security posture. Here's how I'm improving my playbook. Here's how I'm doing DDoS defense. Here's how I'm cleaning up my network. Something every day, right? The days where you say, oh, I can't do it because I don't got money, somebody else's problem. I don't know where to start, right? Oh, nobody's been killed yet. I need to wait for ISO 27100. That's all BS. Let me give an example of that. Towards the end of this presentation, when you download it, I plugged in the Shadow Server, what Shadow Server is all about. So I go to take over as kind of like chief tech person for SmartFriend, which was at the time number 6 cell phone carrier in Indonesia. Number 6 is like 18 million. Indonesia is a big country, and also Moratel. And the boss I was working for, he didn't have money for a security department, so I basically had no security team. So what I do, I grabbed 2 interns who were coming in, young kids coming out of college, or coming right out of college, or intern, then it would be working for us. So I grabbed 2 interns. I took the Shadow Server report. Every day comes in. Here's the Shadow Server report on my network. It says, what you do is you pick one of these reports, and I taught them how to actually go out there and hunt it down and fix it. And then when you hunt it down and fix it, see what else is broke. And they say, okay, then what do I do next? It says, pick another report, pick another thing, go fix it. Every day, do something. Every day, do something. For 2 years, the only thing that SmartFriend had for security was Shadow Server's report. It really locked down that network. We didn't pay for a scene system. We didn't have scan-in. We didn't have all this stuff because we didn't have money to do that. And we just took the shadow server report, took some young engineers, and all they did is every day, drip, 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 just kept on doing it. They go out there and find something going on. They say, oh, our routers are misconfigured. The vendor misconfigured our routers. They didn't follow a practice. Let's write up a new practice. Let's configure it this way. Deploy it. That's fixed. So it would, the shadow server indicators would indicate systemic risk and made the network much more resilient. 2 kids, right out of college, shadow server report. No excuses, right? So that's what you can do out there. Because what happens is, this is a bingo card. I put this bingo card up here. What the bingo card is, this is from Tom Scholl. He runs anti-DDoS over at Amazon. So Amazon has people who do anti-DDoS, go fight the DDoS threat actors. So Tom Scholl writes this up because this is the excuses he gets when he calls up a hosting provider or an ISP, and they go like, oh, that IP that's attacking you, that's not our IP. Well, here, let me show you. Yeah, it is your IP. Here's how you find this out. Oh, our routers can't do ACLs. Well, yeah, here's a router, you can do ACLs. Oh, well, you're being difficult, right? They start insulting you, right? Or we've notified the customer, says, but it's not your customer, it's off your backbone. Or we can't do, you got all these excuses with it. And so what we do is we kind of work with them and kind of like deconstruct these excuses and say, you can't use these excuses anymore. DDoS is a collective threat. One network gets hit, all the other networks, whether they know it or not, are impacted by that. We're all interconnected together with this this massive interconnected monstrosity of the internet, right? So this is where you go out there and kind of do things, who have access with things like that with it. So start with something simple. I find that, one of the things you'll find out when you shadow server report is you'll get like, oh, accessible telnet, accessible SNMP, accessible ports on the router. This is how Mikotech gets hit. Mikotech is set up where it's totally insecure. And I bet you a lot of you on this call are using Mikotech in your networks, and your Mikotech are probably not secure at all because Mikotech doesn't come out of the box secure. You have to very intentionally make it at lockdown and secure. So you take something like this and say, okay, let's make sure that nobody can log into it except for a few addresses, right? Because that's usually how Mikotechs get hit, is they're open to the internet and people can go out there and break into it with vulnerabilities with it, right? So you don't want to have somebody telling into it, out there. You can do things like pull in the vendors and say, let's have a security day. Come in there and say, let's go through what is your security checklist and what are we doing good? What are we doing not good? What are you doing, right? How do we configure it? Let's go through there and say, here's our playbook, what we do, and have a meaningful conversation around that, right? And there is a dialogue script, which I'll point out to in here, that you can use, that anybody can start a dialogue to have meaningful conversations with your vendors about security. So you don't have to be a security guru to start this. Again, and this is a script I actually wrote for those 2 kids when I was at SmartFriend. Because I didn't have time, I was working on something else on a 4G plan, and I said, here's the script. Start pulling in the vendors and start learning about security. And they learn so much because they go like, wow, if I just ask this question, they teach me. And then I'm more informed, I can teach more things with it, right? So that's part of empowerment with it. So this is kind of like the link to that particular guide that originally started with my 2 interns when I was at SmartFriend. And I'm going to be updating this for the cyber insurance industry. So this will be an updated, let's just stay tuned with that, right? Backups. From a network perspective, router goes down. Do I have a backup to the configuration? Do I have a backup to the software? If I got a DDoS attack, I'm not going to go to Cisco and Juniper and Mikotech to download the latest version of the software because the link could be saturated, right? So when you come up with your backup plans and you got DDoS, all right, you got to think through what's going on with this. So you kind of say, okay, it's, what happens if you get like a DDoS and a ransomware at the same time, right? So, it was one time, one router vendor from China said, oh yeah, it's A-okay to take 4 hours to upgrade a router. I says, okay, wait a minute. You mean I got to have 4 hours of downtime on my network just to upgrade your router? No, let's rethink this. This is not the way it should work, right? So, this is the sort of thing to think through with, especially in a DDoS environment. V6, test it. V6, think about it. The reality is V6, we've been deploying V6. V6, we still got a long ways to go to make it really like gameable. Like today I made a comment at the SGNOG meeting that, yes, we're deploying a lot of V6, but I can't play my World of Warcraft with NVIDIA online gaming, on V6. I should be able to play a V6. But because we're in that halfway period, that means V6 is a vulnerability path. We've had threat actors, DDoS-wise, set up proxies on cloud operators. They come in on V4 with the command and control, and they come out and hit you with a V6 attack. And V6 can be very nasty with extension headers. I don't know why we put extension headers in V6, but V6 extension headers can just like trash parts of the internet if you don't have your network set up to actually handle extension headers properly, right? So you got a V6 as part of your DDoS resiliency part of it. Yeah, I got V6, but that means you're vulnerable to, V6 attacks, be prepared for them, right? Cyber criminals figured out V6 was a backdoor. So it says 5 years ago, it was actually 7 years ago. 7 years ago, I started seeing cyber criminals actually using V6 as exfiltration. Oh yeah, I go into the network, I get into the network, I got ransomware, I take the data out. Oh, they have no security on V6. So I'll just exfiltrate all the data from a ransomware and take it off the network via V6 because there's nobody watching V6, right? So you got to put a V6 with it. You'll hear about a lot of stuff about doing threat models. Start with attack trees. Attack trees are so simple. Here's an attack. How can you do it? Here's another attack. How can you do it? It's very accessible to everybody on your team. You can get a secretary in your organization and say, how would you take out the network? How would you take out the business? And that secretary will probably come up with really creative things you never thought of. And an attack tree is a threat model that is very simple. The secretary, you don't have to explain her threat models. You just say, how do you break the business? You should tell you how to break the business, right? So this is a sort of, you don't have to overthink it, right, with it. And you can put it into like, open source tools and things like that. There's open source mind map tools, which are very good for doing attack trees with it. BGP policy, you hear a lot about RPKI and things like that, but one of the things that people are not doing is they're not going through comprehensively, like, what is my policy? And they're not doing things like peer lock. They're not protecting the port 179. They're not doing things to like, here's the policy of who I accept and who I don't accept to, right? There's a whole bunch of things that you got to do before you get the RPKI and get the route signed, right? So, and the best way to do it is write it down in a way that your executives can understand it. Write down a very plain, English, here's my routing policy. Here's how I connect up to ISP1. Here's how I connect at the ISP2. Here's how I connect to across the exchange point. Have it all really written down. And some of this is kind of like articulated over manners. I have a really good, idea with it, because when you do that, it makes it easier to find BGP risk. Because remember, BGP risk is one of the things out there. DNS architecture, everybody forgets DNS. Don't forget DNS. Your authoritative infrastructure will get attacked. Your resolver infrastructure will get attacked. The DNS resolver infrastructure and authoritative infrastructure are different type of architectures. The way you design your resolvers and the way you design your authoritative are different. And some ISPs will say, oh, well, I'll just go put everything on Google. Well, Google's not in your autonomous system. What are you going to do when you're supposed to be autonomous? So when you think through your DNS strategy, there's things that you push up into the cloud. So you work with the cloud, you work with other ASNs, and you also got to say, what if I get disconnected from a DDoS perspective? What if I get that line cut? What if the oceanic links get cut, right? One of the scares that sobered a lot of people when the tanks were across the border of Ukraine was there was a bunch of Russian ships heading off the coast of Ireland. Now, off the coast of Ireland is what? The highest concentration of transatlantic oceanic fiber connections. And so, and the ships were already identified as cable cutting ships. Okay. And then the Irish fishing fleet sortied. So it wasn't warships, there's a bunch of Irish fishermen and they went out there and they just, because that's their fishing zone, and say, Russian ships, get out of here. All right. But what a lot of companies did is they say, like, what if the Irish fishing fleet didn't go out there and save the day? We could have had, what happens if we lose all these cable cuts? Right. So DOS attacks are not just packets. When we got these increased conflicts that are going to happen around the world because of climate chaos, stuff like with Russia and Ukraine, if India and China heats up, right, all these different things, infrastructure gets hit. And we have to keep our services up and running for our customers and our constituents, right? So you kind of look at this, here's your DNS architecture where you say, how do I protect the authoritative infrastructure? All right, so go through that. There's different good presentations out there. I did some good presentations on this when I was at Akamai, so you can look at that. Same thing on the resolver part. How do you keep the resolver up and running inside your network? And don't, cloud-based resolvers, great. They work quite well. But what do you do when the cloud-based resolver is not there? Which is what happened in Puerto Rico with the Hurricane Marina. All right. And again, build your security community. That's like the key part of it, building up your security community. So, who can you pick up the phone? Like Medica KO did in Estonia, give me a call, and a whole bunch of people jump in and help out Estonia. That can be you. All you need to do is build up a relationship. You can ping people and say, hey, I need some help. And people will jump in and help you, right, when you invest in it. So more to come with this. You can find more of these things looking at the stuff from the Apricot presentation. So my contact details are here. Connect up to me, connect up on LinkedIn, bookmark sunq.org, because a lot of good stuff out there. It's not Twitter anymore. I should update that. It's now X. I don't know why it's X, but that's Elon doing X. I'm also Signal, WhatsApp. I'm very reachable out there. And I respond to people when they, especially anything we're talking about here, I help, because we're all part of this inner community together. The rest of this, there's support materials. I'll just walk through this again, some of the support and stuff so you can see how you can use this, pull down the presentation. Remember, at the beginning of the talk, I talked about signing up to all the different update tools from the different CSIRT teams. Here's like the top ones. That's the ones that sign up first. Australia, #1, Canada, New Zealand, European Union, ENISA, right? The NCSC UK, NCSC New Zealand, and the CISA. CISA's at the bottom. I love CISA, but CISA, Washington, D.C. bureaucrats overcomplicate things. You get something of 16 pages, and then Australia would do 1 page. That's why I say go there. Each one of these, they're on X, right? Twitter, X. So you can follow them there, so you get alerts that way. That's one of the quickest way of doing it. They also post on LinkedIn. They also post on email. So you sign up to the email alias. Whenever you see them post together, when you get a joint advisory, drop everything, read what they're saying, see what you need to do on your network, because they're talking about something that is live, straight actor, and you could be collateral damage. You don't want to be collateral damage, right? So when you see joint advisories, sign up to these, right? How much does it cost you? The time to sign up, right? So again, you don't have to sign up for interest in threat intelligence and pay money for it, when you got these organizations that will tell you do A, B, C, D, and it will help protect your network, all right? Now, if you don't do this, you get these things going on. You had one of these advisories that happened, years ago, right? There's one that came out, years ago. They say, hey, Cisco passwords, they don't work well if you use these type 8 and type 6, right? You need to change them around. And then they went active exploit. years later in 2022, right? So if you don't do it, you know, the bad guys know. The bad guys go out there and they look around at the same reports, the same vulnerabilities. They see the different vulnerability and say, hey, I can do that. That's not going to work. I don't have to put a lot of effort. Nobody patched. That's cool. I didn't have to put any effort. I don't have to work hard, and off they go and do it. Remember, they don't want to work hard. All right. So you get this. There's a good talk I did on this when I talked about protecting routers and switches in the apricot tutorials. And this is all on YouTube. You can watch it online with stuff. Threats are going to be expected, but you know, this is a good talk to listen to. So one of the things I did during the Apricot 2022 for the workshop, this is online, is I had 5 of the best DDoS defenders, backtracers in the world come together on a panel session. And what I did is I interviewed them, each of them individually. So all the interviews are online, so you can listen to them, ask them different questions. We talked about it. So it's good to hear different people. And those are people who will respond. You can hear like Damien Mincher, who runs DDoS protection from Google, right? Then they came on with a panel session and I threw a monkey wrench at them. Instead of me asking them questions, I had them ask each other the question they always wish they can ask each other on camera, right? And it was really fun because, you know, had different people ask them questions and they go like, they were really, you know, honest sort of like, here's what's going on. So if you want to hear others, you listen to that, and then each one of them on there will connect to you. You go, oh, I'll connect to Igor down at Vocus in New Zealand. And that's part of your network, right? When you connect to people like that, right? So you reach out there and knock on the doors with that. And then, of course, you've heard me leveraging Shadow Server out there, and here's some other links out there.